Hey guys, thank you for tuning into the podcast. I just wanted to give you a heads up. The sound quality on this interview with Ashley is not the greatest. My computer was acting up, and that's why you hear that little wind in the background. I think it was almost ready to blow up. So I do apologize for the sound quality, but I hope you guys do listen to this interview. She's an amazing person, and I had a lot of fun interviewing her and asking her a couple questions about her life. And I hope you guys enjoy too. All right, have a good one. What's going on, guys? This is the Type 1 Lifting Podcast. I have a special guest with me. She is a professional volleyballer overseas, an avocado toast connoisseur, and also a fellow Type 1 diabetic. So I would love to introduce you guys to Ashley Askin. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Well, I'm glad we connected. So I remember when I first met you, when you actually hit me up on Instagram because you are a Georgia Tech alum. And she was like, you were like, I can't believe, they didn't see you, or didn't meet you. So, yeah.
That would have been so cool to connect when I was in college at GT because, I lift all the time, work out all the time, being a top volleyball athlete. So it was really cool to see you doing that in Atlanta where, I spent 4 years of my life doing that. So
yeah. Yeah, I'm actually a transplant from Georgia, so I'm originally from Massachusetts, and we moved down here. So mainly the story is, so my wife's from Georgia, she's from Alpharetta, and so when we got married, she says, when we have kids, we're moving down south. And I really didn't believe her, and now I have 2 kids, and I'm down in Georgia right now, so.
There you
go. Yeah, so I'd love to dive into your story of when you got diagnosed and you getting into the volleyball, going into volleyball professionally. So when did you first get diagnosed?
So I was 7 years old. So yeah, very early before I even got into volleyball. And I have a very, very active family. So my mom played basketball at Notre Dame. My dad played football at Notre Dame, and then he played for the Cleveland Browns and the Patriots. So we've always been a very, very active family. And then I was the first person to have diabetes in my family, type 1 diabetes. And so it was a big shock for everyone because we're always, so active and healthy, and we've never seen anything like that. And it was around Christmas time. I have an older sister, an older brother, a younger sister, and we all got the flu. So the whole house was sick, and I remember I was the first one to get sick, and then I never got better. So I was the first one to get the flu, and then everyone got it, went through their system and everything, but I never got better. And my mom was kind of like, maybe we should go to the doctor and get this checked out. And so we go to the doctor, and at that point I had lost a ton of weight. I was at the point where every time I would stand up, I would get sick. I was peeing all the time, all the classic symptoms of being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I remember I was just skin and bones. I was 40 pounds, just nothing there. And they took one look at me. I think they may have checked my blood, but I'm not really sure about that. Everything was kind of foggy that day. But yeah, so they took one look at me, then they were like, we gotta get her to the hospital. So they put me in an ambulance, and it was crazy because so I was there with my mom and my family, and they only let one person come with me. They wouldn't let my mom for some reason, so she wasn't with me. My older sister was able to go in the front seat of the ambulance. I'm strapped to this bed in the back of the ambulance. I'm 7 years old, what is going on? I'm alone in the back of this ambulance. They rushed me to the hospital. As soon as we get there, so I'm still strapped to this bed, and they are just trying to get IVs in me. So I think I ended up having 8 IVs, but I was so dehydrated at the time. Yeah, I was so dehydrated at the time that they couldn't get my veins because my veins kept rolling, and so they kept stabbing me and stabbing me and stabbing me. And I just remember laying there what is going on? Where's my family? Just crying and just scared out of my mind because I'm 7 years old alone.
Yeah.
In a hospital. And so they finally get the IVs in me, and during that process, I passed out because I'm just so scared, don't know what's going on. I just pass out. I wake up, I have an IV on both arms, both hands, the bottom of my feet, the back of my ankle. I was hooked up everywhere.
Yeah, so for me, I got diagnosed when I was 34, a month before my 35th birthday. And so I used to work at a children's hospital. I used to work in their ER. And a lot of people know this, like in my story, but so there was this one girl that was 5 years old. She got diagnosed with diabetes, and her mom was like crying hysterically because she thought it was a death sentence. And so, I walked in there and I said, what up, buddy? And just gave her a high five. And like she was like, she had no idea what she was doing. And then I told the mom like my story, and everything's gonna be fine. Especially working at the children's hospital that I was working at, they have a fantastic like floor that's just basically all like a diabetic floor. So, and they have like the best staff, and so I was pretty much telling everybody like everything's okay, and if there's always a new diabetic that comes into the emergency room, I always walk in and just like tell them my story, and try to make it a little bit better, and just try to calm them down, because it's not really a death sentence. It's just like it's a new shift in life, but you just need to just I don't know, just move on from it, just try to get better. So.
And that's so good, and that's so powerful too, because again, being in that situation, I didn't know anyone with diabetes. I didn't have anyone come to me like, hey, this is my story, blah blah blah. I don't think it was until I was in high school that I met anyone else who had type 1 diabetes. So for you to be able to like go and talk to people, that's so important, and that's so powerful.
Yeah.
And for family too, because it's not just the person who's diagnosed; it's the whole family who has to learn how to take care of you, and if this happens, what do you do, and stuff like that. So that's really good.
Yeah, and then with that 5-year-old, that's how I started Type 1 Lifting, the shirt company, because I thought I needed to do a little bit more, because when everyone talked to me, they're like, oh, you're so fit, like you're not a diabetic, how are you a diabetic, you're so fit? And it's like, no, it's a lot different. There's like 2 different ones, and like all that stuff. And so mainly the shirt was mainly the shirt's just for just letting everybody know, like, hey, there's 2 different types of diabetes, and like you can be fit, and even though you do have this disease, you can do amazing things like yourself, what you're doing. So yeah. So how did you get into the whole volleyball thing?
Okay, so like I said, my mom played basketball, and so growing up, basketball was my big sport. So that was the first sport that I really started playing. I played everything, but volleyball was the last thing that I ever tried. And nobody in my family, my whole family, no one ever played volleyball before. But one of the volleyball coaches saw me play basketball and was coming to my games and was like, hey, get her out, let's have her try out for volleyball. So he basically convinced me to just try out, to see it. And so I tried out, and I made it, and I very quickly, I recognized that, hey, I could be really good at this. Like, things just kind of clicked a little bit, and it was different than basketball, because I was really good at basketball, but with volleyball, it was more fun. Like, I was like, if I can be really good at both of these sports, I'm gonna choose the one that is more fun to me. So I started getting really into that and taking that more serious, and so I started playing volleyball when I was 13. Got my first letter for college, like recruiting letter, at 14. So very quickly, I was like, oh, maybe I can do something with this. So I got that first letter, and I was like, ooh, okay. And so yeah, and then it just kind of like snowballed from there. But with like the whole diabetes thing, playing sports my whole life, really, each sport was different. So like for basketball, I remember every halftime my blood sugar would tank, and every halftime my mom, she would coach me. She would have like a Snickers ready for me, and I would have a Snickers in between the game and stuff like that. And then in volleyball, I would go really, really high before games because of all the adrenaline, just being excited, and then after the game I would go low. And so it's been really interesting learning how my body reacts to different exercises and things like that. But yeah, along with like your whole like t-shirt company and everything, I think it's so important to see role models and see people doing things who have type 1 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, when I was little, I didn't have anyone that had it. So I was kind of going about learning all these things through sports and everything without anyone that I could look to, like, hey, that person is doing it, So yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So when you were when the whole recruiting process, now were some colleges like really like nervous about like recruiting you because you were diabetic, or were there any issues with that, or?
So I was very quiet about my diabetes. So again, I was diagnosed at 7, which is a tough age because school and stuff like that. So I was always hiding it. I would go to the bathroom and check my blood. I was always embarrassed because, people react different ways, especially when you're a little kid and you check your blood. Everyone's like, ew, blood, ew, needles. They make fun of you. So all through middle school and then into high school, I would always hide it. But of course, like, my coaches would know. My mom made sure of that. She's like, hey, da, 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 whatever. But I always did my best to not have any issues with it and stuff. But it wasn't until I got into high school where, volleyball picks up, you start doing travel ball, you start lifting, you start doing things that are a lot more intense on your body. And so that was where I did have to kind of shift the way I looked at it and start telling people, start telling friends, start telling, classmates and stuff like, hey, I have diabetes. If I eat something in class, this is what it means, and blah, 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 whatever. But when it got to recruiting, that was always what I was so scared of. I was like, no one's going to want to sign me if I have diabetes. My thought was always, if it's me versus another girl, they're going to choose her every time because she doesn't have diabetes. I was just always scared of it. So with the recruiting process, I would go on these visits and I would go see their campus and do all these things, but it wasn't until that they offered me a scholarship that I would be like, okay, well, I have diabetes. Like, I wanted to, like, make it to the end before I brought it up, which, looking back, it didn't make a difference having diabetes or not. It was my own fear about it, but yeah, that's kind of how I handled it. I don't know if it was the best way, but yeah, it worked out for the best.
Yeah. So when you're talking, like, when you were just talking about being, afraid and nervous about, like, being a diabetic, when did that kind of, like, stop for you? And you're able to, like, talk more about it and be, like, more be more out in the open about it.
Okay, this is gonna sound really weird, but it wasn't until I got my first boyfriend in high school, which is so weird because I don't know, in the back of my head I was always like, no one's gonna like me if I have diabetes, da 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 da. And when I got my first boyfriend, he didn't care that I had diabetes and actually thought it was kind of cool. That's when I, like, got that confidence and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, people like me and I have diabetes and I have a boyfriend. Like, so that was the shifting point, which is so weird to say, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's everyone opens up differently compared to, like, other people. So, I mean, with me, I think it was just me with that 5-year-old girl, just, like, talking about it, and then, like, finding my coworkers in the emergency room. They already know what diabetes is, so they always give me, like, flack about it. So it's a joke, like, joking around about it, and I joke back, so that kind of helped out a little bit too. So, but I think that 5-year-old definitely was a huge stepping point for me as well. So, I mean, I've injected out in the open, and I've heard people go ooh, and stuff like that. And so, and I'm always open to talking to anybody about diabetes too, just to, like, get my point of view on it and, like, see where they are at, talking about diabetes and stuff. So, I mean, it's good for people to know. So.
Yeah, and it's so important to be an advocate for yourself too, because each one of us is so different. Once I finally started meeting people with diabetes, I realized that they can do this and I can do that, and we have different results. You can do A, B, and C and still get a different result. And so it is so important to be an advocate and speak up for yourself because, again, you learn all along the way, and people aren't going to know how you're feeling unless you tell them. And so that was one big thing that I learned through Georgia Tech too, because when I was being recruited, I was recruited by Tanya Johnson, who was the head coach at Georgia Tech at the time. But my senior year, after I had already signed, she actually took the coaching job in Texas. So I had a coaching switch going into Georgia Tech. So this was somebody who knew I had diabetes, knew my story. I signed when I was a sophomore in high school, so she knew me for 3 years before I even was expecting to go. So having a coaching switch literally months before I was supposed to arrive at Georgia Tech was, like, big, like, oh no, what's gonna happen? Now I gotta, like, start this whole new relationship with her and whatever. And so I walked into Georgia Tech with a brand new coach, somebody who didn't know about diabetes. She still wanted me. She was still really excited, and I figured Georgia Tech is the college that I really wanted to go to. Despite volleyball, my parents always said, go to the college that you want to get a degree from. Like, go somewhere that's going to set you up for life instead of just volleyball, because, you could break your leg and never play again in your whole life. You want to be where you want to be. And so that was the reason I stuck with Georgia Tech. And going into that, I knew that I needed to, like, speak up for myself, but you're also against everyone for a coach that nobody knows. So we kind of came in with, everyone's kind of like coming at each other's necks because they're trying to prove themselves, you know?
Yeah.
So again, with Georgia Tech, looking back, I learned I need to be an advocate for myself and stand up for myself if my blood sugar is too low or too high, but I definitely did not do that when I was at Georgia Tech. I was always just trying to like fight through things and just stay on the court as long as possible because I thought I would be reliable and, I could be consistent in that sense, but you have to speak up and you have to say, hey, my blood sugar's low, I need to sit out, or hey, this is what's going on, I need to, rest, so.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So now for college, so when you went to Georgia Tech, so what was college like being a diabetic? Because obviously I'm definitely didn't get it when I was in college, so I really don't know the experience at all, so.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so college, learned a ton. So I came from Louisville, Kentucky, but not even from Louisville, I'm from like a smaller area called Oldham County, and so coming to Atlanta itself was a huge difference. Just being in a city, walking a lot more, being in the sun a lot more, which again, those things affect your blood sugar on its own. Like I learned very quickly when I'm walking around all day, my blood sugar tanks. So that, and then being on your own, and then having all this social interaction, and then partying, and like things that I didn't do in high school, things that like I wasn't sure I didn't know how to, control that with blood sugars and stuff like that. And then again, jumping into playing volleyball at the highest level, you don't know how your body is going to react to lifting and sprinting and doing all these things every single day at the highest level, and like being up at 5 a.m. every day and then not going to bed until like 11 and all these things. So again, Georgia Tech, it was the hardest time of my life, but I learned so much.
Yeah. Now, were you on the pump at the time at Georgia Tech, or were you on like any device at all, or just injections?
I have never done the pump. Yeah, I've always done injections, but it was my freshman year. I actually started doing the Dexcom because my trainer was like, we need to be able to see. And there was another boy, there's the quarterback at the time, he actually had type 1 diabetes. And so me and him, the trainers would often compare us, which again, he's a guy, I'm a girl, so I have whole different like hormones and stuff going on. So it's not a straight comparison, and it was kind of hard for me because my blood sugars would go up and down all the time, and for him, he was a lot more steady, and that was something that the trainers would always kind of be like, well, Matt's doing good, what's going on with you, and whatever. So he was on the Dexcom. My trainer was like, hey, you should get on it too because we can see your blood sugars, other people can see your blood sugars, which helped a ton, actually. At the time, I was against it because I didn't want everyone to always know what's going on with me. I don't know, I kind of like having a bit more freedom and not having to always explain like why my blood sugar is this or what's going on. And so I was a little bit against it at the time, but my blood sugars were so much better when I was on that, for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, definitely. Now, for like working out wise, so what was your typical like workout program, like off season and on season?
Okay, so I'll break it down into 3 segments. It was basically like 3 seasons. So summer, we went to summer school every year because we're a fall sport, so summer is where you really gotta like make sure you're good going into the season. So in the summer, we would have open gyms every day, which is essentially practice without the coaches, just to make sure your skills are up and stuff. So we would do open gym every day, and we would work out every day, which again, everything was optional at that point. It's the summer, so they can't mandate you to do anything. So we would, you'd have workouts in the morning, and then you'd have open gym whenever you could throughout the day. So that was every single day of the week. You'd have the weekends off. You'd have classes probably from like 9 a.m. until about like 3, depending on whatever your schedule was. And then once the season started, it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay, so you'd have workouts Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Monday. Okay, in season it was Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I think. You would work out in the morning, have class from 8 to 2, 3-ish, practice from like 3 to 6, and then
Mm-hmm.
I hated spring because during season you take the easy classes, you'd have the lightest amount of hours classes because you want to be ready for games and stuff like that. In the springtime, you had all your classes, you take your hard classes, and you'd be up at 5 a.m. every single day for heavy lifting and sprinting, which was the worst. I hated that. Um, and then you'd go to class from 8 to 3, practice 3 to 6, tutoring. So you'd be up. It's the same thing. You would just be up at 5 a.m. every single day, and it would be terrible on my blood sugars because in the morning, for me, my blood sugars spike up. It's like when I wake up, it's all your hormones and all that stuff. Like just waking up, you're on its own.
Yeah, the dawn effect. Yeah.
Sugars. Yeah. And then lifting raises your blood sugar as well. So we wake up at 5, we'd be lifting at 6, lifting heavy, and then sprinting, again, was another thing that made my blood sugars go crazy. So I would be lifting, I'd be sprinting, I'd be up in the morning. My blood sugars would be like 400 sometimes. And it was so, yeah. I remember we would lift the first hour, and then halfway through, I would always check to see like what's going on. And it would usually be around like 250 halfway through. I would do insulin, and I wouldn't eat before these things because I was just trying to do everything I could to keep my blood sugars down. I would do insulin. By the time we got to the sprints, my blood sugars would be around like 300, maybe 400. But I wouldn't necessarily feel like it was a bad high. I knew it was because of the lifting and stuff. But as soon as we started running, that's when you feel like you're running with like sandbags on because your body is just so tired. And man, that was the hardest. And then when we would finish, so I'd go to class at 8 a.m. I would almost always like fall asleep in class because my blood sugar would just tank. Like I would be like 50 after that, and it was a bad cycle of being super high all morning, tanking, and then the rest of the day playing catch up to try to get my blood sugars to be okay in time for practice. So it was the hardest time of my life, but you learn a lot.
Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like that schedule, because I play college sports, but it wasn't like D1, so it's not like a full-time job. But they were trying to make it like a full-time job, and it's like, guys, it's like D3. Just chill out a little bit. So, but yeah, it's you guys are like super busy. So, so when did you start going pro, or when did you get like people like wanting to talk to you about maybe going overseas and playing?
Okay, so this is a funny story on itself. When I was done playing volleyball at Georgia Tech, I was done. I was like, I'm done with volleyball. I was just physically so exhausted from, just my schedule itself. And then also, I was just ready for my blood sugars to be normal again. Like, I was just ready to stop having everything be so intense. I wanted a break. I wanted my blood sugars to be fine. I just wanted to be normal. So when I finished playing at Georgia Tech, I was like, I'm done with this. I'm going to do something completely different. And I actually got into modeling. And so early on at Georgia Tech, this modeling agency found me, and because of like NCAA, I wasn't allowed to model during college. And so we would go and we would do test shoots with them every year. So when I would come home for Christmas, I would go to St. Louis and like do these photo shoots with Mother Model, and just to get some training, for when I do finish volleyball and I can actually model. So as soon as I finished playing volleyball at Georgia Tech, called them up and I was like, hey, I'm ready, like let's go. So we got really into modeling. And I would go to like Chicago and do different things, and I was geared up to move to New York and do modeling full time. And I was in talks with the modeling agency there, and everything was set. And I was like, oh, we're gonna move to New York, and da 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 da. And then before all that happened, I'm not like a super skinny typical model, but things are changing. There's more curvy models, athletic, whatever. But this was 3 years ago, so it was still at the beginning of these things, and there's not really a set size for curvy and plus size models. So I remember before I was supposed to go to New York, this agency was like, okay, we'll send me your measurements. But I had lost a ton of weight from just not lifting every day and stuff. So like my measurements had like gotten a lot smaller, and they were like, hey, your measurements aren't what we're looking for anymore. We're going to move in a different direction. So I was kind of heartbroken because I put all my eggs in one basket. I was like modeling, this is what I'm doing, blah blah blah. I didn't have any jobs lined up because I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go all into this, like whatever. So that happened, and I thought was going to happen, and I don't have a plan B. And 2 days later, the coach in England reached out to me on Facebook, actually. She sent me a message and was like, hey, do you want to come to England and play for our team? You can play professional. You can also get a master's while you're here. And, talked it up to me a lot. And I was like, I don't have a plan B, and this sounds pretty good to play professional volleyball and get my master's degree. Like, maybe I should do this. And this was in late August, and by this time, the other girls were already there, and there was a deadline. So I had 1 week to decide if I was going to go to England. And I was sitting there, and I was like, why not? Let's do this. Let's see what it's about. And I had full support from my parents. They're like, do it. This is the time of your life to go overseas and do these things. So I made a complete switch of my life, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna play volleyball again. So I had 1 week to get everything ready, and then you're applying to get your visa, and I had to apply to get into the college and the master's program and everything. So it was all this stuff back to back to back. I make it to England, I think the first week of October. I missed the whole preseason with the team. I missed all that stuff. I just jumped right into the very first day of school. I made it right in time for the very first day of class. But yeah, that's how I got to England. And then playing in England, it kind of gave me a rebirth of volleyball. And I was like, this is so fun. It was a whole nother, because in college, it was very, very tough, and it was very draining that I kind of didn't find it as fun when I was there. But coming to England, I was like, this is so fun, this is awesome, da da da. And then from there, I was like, I want to keep playing. And then that's how I got to France. And yeah, so it's been interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So the team you're playing on now is I was trying to find the pronunciation to this because I was actually Google searching it. So is it Les Louvres? Les Louvres. Okay, all right, I was close. Yeah. So so you played for a year in England, then moved over to Italy, or how did that work?
So I did a year in England, and then from there, I had an agent reached out to me and was like, hey, you want to keep playing? I can help you find teams. And then we looked at different countries: Italy, Germany, Spain, France. And I visited France a few times while I was in England, and I really, really loved the country, the food and stuff. So I was like, let's go to France. But yeah, so I had an agent, and he found a team for me in France, and I was like, hey, let's do this. So yeah.
Yeah, and so was this your first year playing with them, or?
Yes.
Okay, and then you got cut short, obviously, with the, COVID-19 and stuff like that. So with being a diabetic overseas, what was life like that? Did people still get a better understanding compared to here, or what was that like?
So England and France were two very, very different experiences in a sense of, in England, there was no language barrier, so that was a blessing. That was easy for me. The biggest difference was just the healthcare system in general. Everything was free. I just remember going to the pharmacy and getting my insulin, and the very first time I just kind of stood there waiting for them to ask me to pay, and they're like, have a good day, see you later. And I remember walking out thinking I just robbed
Yeah. So are you planning to go back there next year or like whenever? Like, how long is the season typically for like a volleyball player? Like
So
that was not in COVID-19. You know.
yeah. So in Europe, the volleyball seasons are 10.5 months, which is really, really long and really intense. So I would still be there until May 28th. That's when I was due to like come home. So yeah, long time, but
Yeah. So were you gonna like team up with them next year at all, or sign a contract with them?
um, so I was kind of taking that day by day because initially when I first got to France, I was like, I want to keep playing here. I want to make like I had goals of like I want to play for this team. They're really good. Like I want to play in the south of France, do all these things. But again, 10.5 months is a long time, and I've never, even at Georgia Tech, you have breaks. You have your main season, and then you have your off season. You have a whole month off during Christmas. When you're playing professionally, you don't have time off ever. So practicing twice a day, working out every single day, I was used to that, but I was also used to having breaks. So being in France, my body started to like wear out a little bit. Like there were certain points where I was like, I don't even know if I can lift my shoulder right now, just because again, just like the impact of like hitting every single day and lifting every single day, it was hard. So as the season went on, I was like, I don't know if I want to keep playing. Like I want to be able to like use my body when I'm older, you know?
Yeah.
So towards the end, I was like, I think this is good. I think I've kind of like done the most, the highest that I can do with volleyball, and also kind of like filled my ego to the max of what I can do with volleyball. And at this point, I'm ready to kind of put that chapter aside and dive into the next part of my life. And yeah, so that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah. So what was it like with like lifting wise for your season? Was it like a maintenance phase, like kind of like, lightweight, high reps, or like what was the workouts like?
So it was, we would lift 3 days a week, and then we would do cardio. We would do cardio every single day, basically. At least to warm up, you'd do like 20 minutes of running or biking or whatever. But Mondays would be lighter just because we would play on the weekend and travel, and then you'd come back. Monday was lighter. Wednesday was heavy lifting, and then Friday was still heavy, but lighter because we would play on Saturday.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a good balance. Honestly, the schedule there was really, it was good on the body. It's just over time it's hard.
Yeah. 10 months is very, very long, especially playing a sport. So yeah, that's crazy. So what do you think your next? What do you think you're going to be doing next? Pretty much.
Okay.
After volleyball.
So, at Georgia Tech, I started off in engineering, and then I was in industrial engineering, and then I switched to business because I realized I'm really good at speaking with people. I'm good at talking to people. So I switched to business. I did marketing. When I got my master's degree, I did entrepreneurship. That was my focus. But with my skill set and stuff, I want to get some business experience under my belt before I dive into like starting my own business. That's a goal of mine later down the road, but I need to learn a lot more. But at this point, I'm thinking consulting or sales because, again, I'm good at like problem solving, and I'm good at talking to people and like being active and stuff like that. So I think sales and consulting are my two top ones right now.
Yeah. So that a little fun fact for me is I actually do roofing sales part time, and so I like knock on random people's doors and ask if they want me to check their roof out, and so that is a huge help. That was a huge help for me with like sales, pretty much, because in the beginning I was like super nervous and stuff, but I wouldn't even fathom like doing that. But then you realize I'm like, okay, well, I got 2 kids back at home. I got my wife back at home. We kind of need a little bit of money, so got to do it. And so I just take a nice deep breath in, knock on the door, and then some people would say like no, or get off my property, or I shoot you, or all that stuff. But like I think that was a huge help for me, just like going out there and just doing it. So for sales wise, so and even with the shirts, like I always like try to, I don't try to sell everybody, but I just tell them like what the shirt's all about, and like tell them the story, and make sure they completely understand. So
yeah,
so
and
yeah.
that's so important too. Just being able to like step out of yourself and by yourself, so you have to force yourself to meet people and make friends. Otherwise, it's really, really lonely. It's really isolating. So again, with like jumping into sales or consulting, now that I've been overseas and I've had to do that on my own for so long, I do feel very comfortable, like just calling someone up and like, hey, my name's Ashley. This is my story. This is me. So yeah, definitely understand that.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Now, so now we're getting towards the end. So what would you want to tell people about diabetes, and like, just want to get your thought on, how to pretty much let them understand better what your diabetes is.
Okay, I think about this all the time because I'm like, type 1 and type 2 are completely different. I'm always like, there needs to be a rebranding of type 1 diabetes because they are not the same. What I would tell other people is like, I didn't ask for this. I think that's a common misconception that people think like, oh, you ate too much sugar when you were little, or hey, you need to get outside and work out, blah blah blah. Like, this is not something that you ask for. It's an autoimmune disease, so you can be the healthiest person in the world and you can still get it. So that's one thing that I'm like, quit making all these jokes about me eating sugar. Like, I didn't ask for this. It just happened. But if I was going to tell somebody with diabetes, like I'm thinking, me when I was 7 years old, what would I tell myself? Like, it's going to be fine. And you're going to be able to do all the things that you want to do. Like, don't ever let it limit you from trying something. Don't ever let it limit you from like for me, I didn't even think playing overseas was a thing. Like, I didn't think I could do it. I was scared because I was like, what am I going to do in another country if something happens? But like, now that I've done all these different things, I feel like you could put me in any situation and I would be fine. But like 7-year-old me, I'd be like, I don't know, with diabetes, da da da. So I would tell someone like, you are going to be fine. Don't let it limit you, and you're going to live a long and healthy life. Like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, if you manage it well, because I've seen some bad cases. So, especially working in the ER, I see some really bad cases that kids just don't care, which is shocking. So, but yeah. And last thing, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have to give a lot of thanks to my family, though, too, because I was at 7 years old. You are really, if your parents don't take it serious, you probably won't. So my mom was the biggest reason I was so healthy, because, we used to she used to count out all my carbs, write everything out on like a little Post-it note, put it in my lunchbox. Like, I knew exactly everything. Like, everything was calculated to the T. We wrote every single thing down. Like, I used to be like the best patient. Like, they used to when we would go to the endocrinologist, they'd be like, wow, your numbers are amazing, da da da, because we did everything to a T. And so I mean, I think a lot of the success that comes from like people who are diagnosed is like, who are they supported by and who are they surrounded by, and it's such a big thing for the whole family.
Yeah.
I really thank my mom and my dad for being so hands-on and taking it so serious when I was little, because I wouldn't be here doing as well as I am without that. So
yeah.
Shout out to all the parents out there with kids. Like, you are doing great.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, one of my coworkers, her daughter became a diabetic, and she would always ask me questions and stuff about like diabetes, and now it's to the point with her. I think she was like 8 or 9, I think, and she's like injecting herself and like doing everything. She's like, Mom, I got it. Don't worry about it. She's like an absolute pro on it, and like it was just from like learning and understanding from her parents and like other people that like she could do it herself, and she has this girl has no fear, which is hilarious. So, which is awesome, and she's always like proud about like being not proud of it being diabetic, but like always talking about it. So, which is pretty cool. And last question, why do you like avocado toast so much?
I love it. Okay, so I figured this out in college. It is the perfect meal for me to start my day, because like toast and if I put eggs on it too, like I've got the protein, I've got fat, like it's a very balanced meal. So like I noticed early on that when I have this for breakfast, like my blood sugars are very stable for the rest of the afternoon. So that was like one of the biggest reasons, because I would eat oatmeal a lot and I would have like, brown sugar in it and stuff like that. So I didn't like the spice in the morning. So one, I love avocado toast. So good. I put it like everything bagel seasoning, or I put like eggs on it, or lemon pepper seasoning, so good. But one, I love
Yeah. So have you tried the Trader Joe's everything but the bagel?
Yes, that's what we use.
Oh, okay,
So,
good. Yeah, I love that stuff. Stuff's so good. So, all right, awesome. So, where can people reach you or find you, or and ask you any questions at all?
Okay, so you can follow me on Instagram. My name is at Ashwey33, ASHWEY 33. And I have a lot of like diabetes people on there, so you can reach out to me if you ever have like a question about diabetes, stuff like that. Feel free to reach out to me, anyone. And then on Twitter, I'm at Ashley Askin 33. Same thing, if you have a question or you want to talk to me or whatever, feel free to reach out. I'm an advocate for diabetes. Like, I know what it's like being little and having these questions. So, yeah, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter.
And she's very good at responding back, people. Trust me. See, I've sent her messages. She's pretty quick to respond back, so which is awesome. But thank you very much, Ashley, for being on my podcast. It truly means a lot, and I'm very grateful for connecting with you as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for asking me. This is a pleasure to get on here and share my story.
All right. Well, have a good one.